Jeff and Jerry have asked me to look around at what I know about what's being built now and what's been built sort of in the last 10 years and identify trends that I see in the buildings that are being built that are reflective of what I see are trends in art centers in general. And just so you know my background, I'm both an architect and a theater person. My first career really in New York was designing scenery for internationally, off-Broadway, and in regional theater for the New Play Circuit in New York. And I later went on to study architecture at Yale and have been practicing architecture since then. My interest in this is great because I'm interested in all things that are at this sort of cusp or intersection between architecture and the performing arts. So it's a treat for me to be involved, and I appreciate the opportunity. What I'm going to talk about today is essentially the art centers of the 21st century. And really what I'm going to be showing are probably the tail end of the art centers of the 20th century. You know, it's what we now are building that are addressing trends that we see in the future, but really are in some ways based in the modes of what we already know, or the presentation modes that we already know. And I've broken it into a series of themes so we can really sort of gather examples that might point toward trends. The themes are mechanized flexible spaces. So I think we've all worked in the kind of black box mode where you have a flexible open space. These carry that further to mechanize that whole notion of flexibility within a black box environment. Hybrid performance spaces. So these are spaces that are really serving dual uses without necessarily having to change their configuration or what the space is about. Interdisciplinarity of the art center, and this is sort of referred to in the last session. I think it's a big question that I think all of us are facing is in the blending of the arts or the breaking down of boundaries between arts, what's happening in facilities that is promoting that or facilitating that. Transparency is a huge issue that I see happening in architecture in general, but is one in the performing arts that is specifically interesting to me because it falls into two categories. It's sort of transparency or revealing the creative act in one of those areas. And the second would be transparency and the public space. So we see many more performing arts centers that are revealing either what happens in the public realm, you know, the front of house parts of theaters, or really that are trying to reveal what's going on with the creative act to involve the public in that dialogue between the artist and the public. Experimental media, technology, and performance is a huge issue in I think in the coming years, and something that many centers are trying to address. The expanded role of public space. So public spaces in our theaters are no longer just considered to be the lobby space, but they are potential performance spaces, interaction spaces, and the kind of spaces for the kind of virtual things that we were talking about earlier. And then really, lastly, buildings as sort of performative objects in and of themselves. So I've got examples that relate to all of these themes. The first, mechanized flexible spaces. I've got two examples here, the most current of which is on the left, the new Wyly Theater built in Dallas, which is part of a larger arts district in Dallas. And on the right, an older theater, the Schaubuhne in Berlin, which is Peter Stein's theater, was adapted for an old cinema in Berlin in the early 80s. So this is the new Wyly Theater in Dallas. As I said, it's part of a larger arts district that encompasses new Philharmonic Hall, museum campuses that were already there. And this was designed by Joshua Prince Rasmus and Rem Koolhaas's firm. And the two spaces I'm going to show you in the sort of flexible idea, the idea of mechanized flexible spaces, this is vertical, and the second one is very horizontal. And they adapt very differently to different ways of thinking about using space. So this is a section drawing. If you imagine cutting through the building and looking at the building, this is the theater space here. So fly loft, theater space here. And you can see there are galleries on both sides of this that wrap around the theater on 3 sides, actually. And you can see down here there's a sloping orchestra level floor. The way you enter the building is underneath the theater and you come up into the theater. All of this space is like a mechanized toy box almost. So that the galleries can go away, they fly up into, you can see this up here is the position of these galleries. So they can actually go away. It can be one large open space, or you can introduce these galleries. This can be a flat floor, it can be a raked floor. And then you have this very, very high stage house that addresses outside the proscenium here. So this is it in the other direction, looking back out to the house. So you can see this is with a flat floor here. These are the galleries in place, and you can see these great hydraulic lifts that lift all this stuff up into this zone here. So again, you can have a very large open space. You can have galleries and a flat floor. You can have a sloped floor in the auditorium. This is the view from the outside. This is the entrance. You walk in underneath into the lobby space down below, and you're actually experiencing the theater above, which is, I think, another trend that I'm seeing frequently in theaters, which is the idea of exposing the shape, the physical reality of the performance space within a larger envelope. So when you walk into the theater, you could see walk into the lobby, you see where the theater is, sort of raises your anticipation about going into that space, and and in this case, you come underneath the theater here, walk up the stairs, and you arrive in the theater above. This is the space, so you can see all of these platforms in these galleries can actually go away. So you can have this be one large open space, or you can have it be a thrust configuration. As we already know from a lot of black box theaters, the idea of changing the configuration between audience and performer is is an idea that's been with us for a while. One thing I do want to note is that what you see here is a band of natural light that wraps the entire auditorium. And that's something that I do see more often, is the ability to connect to the outside world. So there's not this can all be darkened, of course, if you want it to be, but the idea that this could be a concert hall or a different kind of dance performance, or that you could see into this from the outside, I think is very important in this project. It also allows for natural light to be in there when you're working, if you're rehearsing, or, it allows for different possibilities for nighttime or daytime use. So this is the Schaubuhne in Berlin. This was an old cinema that was converted for Peter Stein's company, and you can see the plan of it. It's very long space here. This is a section drawing, so if you imagine cutting through here and looking that way, this is what the space looks like. It's divided into 3 theaters, so you can have it open as one enormous, like almost half a football field. Not quite that, but it's huge. It can be divided into these 3 areas as individual theaters. You can divide it, into 2 spaces, or you can leave it open as one very large theater. This is really an incredible laboratory to be able to divide space and use it in different ways that way. And you can see here that the entire floor is on these scissor lifts. Each of these little rectangles is a platform that can move up and down. So the space can be configured in one of many ways. So this is the idea of space being configured for, let's say, an alley presentation with performance in the middle. There are these galleries that link each side, and all of the support spaces are down below the theater. So this gives you an idea of the kind of the ability to change the volume of the space, which I think is very important. This is the space completely open. This is probably 2/3 of the space being used here, with a large thrust coming out, sort of similar to Circle Rep's thrust. This is a thrust configuration that only uses one of the spaces. So in this instance, it's a laboratory that can be configured in many different ways. It's, I guess, sort of a factory for redesign. So moving on to the idea of hybrid spaces. This is a new theater. It's part of a mixed-use development in Washington, D.C. This is the second stage for the Shakespeare Theater in Washington. you can see it was built as a part of a new complex. Surrounding it is an office building, and at the core of it is this new performance space. It's in Penn Quarter in Washington, and it's part of a growing arts and theater district there. So here's what the building looks like. This is the larger building. This is the smaller building. There's an art set aside in the bottom of the building that the developers agreed to as part of the city planning. And this has happened with several different projects there, where there have been set-asides in major developments that are dedicated to arts building or arts components in the buildings. And in this area, it's been typically for performing arts. So this is what I'm calling the hybrid space. You can see that it projects out, and if you look back at this, you can see also the idea of transparency in the lobby spaces that I'll be talking about a little bit later. But this really is like a huge bay window or a proscenium into the public spaces of the theater. And that's the space you're looking at here. This is the MCI Center across the street. So this is like a hugely populated area. This is the theater in plan. So all this stuff around the outside of it is support space. Very, very limited backstage space here, right? This is the big volume, very limited backstage space. This is the joint between the lobby and the theater itself. So the theater, you see it all the way up from floor to ceiling. The actual auditorium you see from floor to ceiling. And this is the space. So what they wanted with the space was to have it be a concert hall and a theater for the spoken word, for live performance. And so what they came up with was a hybrid of a large volume space with a permanent surround that could be used as like you have in this concert hall or many other concert halls around, that there's a permanent reflective surround around all sides of the theater that allow it to be an acoustic room for music performance, but then allow it to change into being a theatrical room for presentations of theater pieces. So it's interesting because this actually, the idea of this surround being physically a concert hall when scenery is gone is in some ways probably the prevalent one in the theater space. It overshadows in many ways the flexibility or the ability to use it as a theater space. And they're still learning how to use it. Total seating capacity on that, I think, is about, it's between 600 and 800, I think, in that range. And they have a second theater that's down the Landsberg Theater that's just down the street. So here is the next, I guess, theme, if you will, the notion of interdisciplinary art and the crossover between, that Ruby really started talking about before, the crossover between different disciplines and the desire to break down the barriers between those disciplines. And I'm just citing two examples here, although there are many, and probably many of you have been to REDCAT in Los Angeles. This is a part of the Disney concert hall that was carved out to be part of CalArts and serves as both a gallery, experimentation space, as well as a performance space. And so in that sense, it serves as a laboratory as well as a presentation space. And I think that gets a little bit to the notion of what some of the other panels will be talking about, which is we're looking at ideas of what is a presentation space, what is a place to create new work, is there a difference between those spaces? And in this case, I think that those spaces were really designed to do both things. So this is the theater at REDCAT. You can see it's high volume, flexible space with technology, appropriate technology and flexible technology that you can use. This is the example of, for one production, what they're doing. The gallery space there. So installations that are happening that are as much about, spatial considerations as well as traditional art, so that involve also multimedia work. So the two of these together are feeding the notion that like this building does, as it was originally conceived, that there should be this synthesis between the different media of the arts. This is a second example. This is the Yamaguchi Center for Arts and Media in Yamaguchi, Japan. This is a center that was purpose-built for artists in residence work, and it serves both performance and digital media work and development of performance. This is a longer view of it. You can see it's enormous. So the kinds of things that are going on there are in here, like you can see that there's a kind of a rough and tumble notion of a laboratory or a workshop or the place where artists can actually do work. The building itself has acted as the backdrop for work to be created on. The public spaces and laboratories within it serve as both performance spaces and spaces for installation. In this case, they do a lot of work with sound performance, sound installations, and multimedia work, and this is one example of that. Again, more sound installation in the work. And I don't have examples of performance from this center, but the performances range from, well, installations like this. So this is installation in a theater space, right? This is performance in a public space. So the notion that these spaces can be flexibly used, I think is important. Here's one example of one of the large-scale multimedia performances that they do there. And this is on the outside of the theater, that the entire landscape around the performing arts complex serves as a canvas for installation as well. Transparency in the creative act. Most of you, especially those from New York, know about the Alvin Ailey, the new building for the Alvin Ailey. And really the idea behind this was to allow this creative energy that is part of the Ailey Company to flow out onto the streets of New York and be part of the public life of New York. So you can see, and these have the ability to close off the studios, but you can see that from both directions, from the direction looking in the street here and from, looking out from the studios, there's a very strong connection between outside and inside. And the idea there is that it's really about giving the public access to the creative act. Slightly different, the Woolly Mammoth Theater, which was really conceived of as a lab. I think Howard Schulwitz called it a transparent laboratory for creating new theater work. And his idea was that within the space, as opposed to out onto the street, that all aspects of the new creation of new work or rehearsal could be shown. So this is the lower level. Here's the theater. These are all the backstage spaces. These are the primary rehearsal rooms and lobby areas here. And the idea was to connect those. This is a rendering of that. These are the rehearsal spaces. These are the lobby areas that connect above and below. Behind here is the theater space. And the idea is really to connect visually these theater labs up into the lobby space so that everybody knows, the people who work there, the people who come there, frequent there, know and can see kind of what's going on in those spaces. And there is the ability to close these off as well. But the idea of being able to open this up to whoever is involved in the production or on the staff or public is there. These are some other views of that. Looking back down into the rehearsal rooms down here. And this is their theater space. So this is a courtyard theater, which is also very flexible. And you can see in many of the images that I'm showing, a lot of this has a sort of an industrial aesthetic to it, right? I think that is another trend that we see, that it's about creating this machine that facilitates the making of new art. Transparency in public space. So looking at the new Alice Tully Hall, which took what was a raised plaza that separated Alice Tully Hall from Broadway, adding on to that on the Broadway side, adding on new spaces and especially new public spaces that allow this kind of transparency between what's going on in the urban street scene and what's going on inside the new lobby spaces. And those all connect then back into the newly made theater. This is Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro's project. Another project, this time back in DC. This is Arena Stage, and probably many of you know Arena Stage as being that smaller building right in there. Here's what they've done with Arena. This is Arena, the original Arena, Harry Weiss building. This is the Krieger Theater, and they've essentially wrapped it in a transparent envelope. And that transparent envelope has become the public realm that separates these two theaters and a new theater, which they're calling the Cradle, which is a theater that they've made to create, to foster new art, new playwriting as well. So between the three of them, this interstitial space is what really is the public realm. This is a rendering of what the new Cradle will be, and it's. I'm very curious to go into the space. It hasn't been finished yet. I'm very curious to see how it's going to work. The division between back of house and front of house is really a big question for me. But it's a very exciting proposition for Southeast Washington, and you can see that all of this is about putting the audience on display, really. So it becomes, this is part of performance work, is that when you come to performance, you are really participating in that performance, and audience watching is as much a part of performance as performance watching. So this is a trend, I think, in that direction, sort of taking it in the extreme. This is the building under construction, and that you can just see this is the idea of these transparent jewels that sit inside this glass envelope. That is something that for those of you that know the Kimmel Center in Philadelphia, for instance, another trend, which is the idea of having theaters, multiple theaters within a transparent box so that you see the different theater experiences and you can go in between those theaters. And this certainly is one example of that. Experimental media technology and performance. So there are two examples here, one of which many of you know, the EMPAC, Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center, that was commissioned last year, I guess, at RPI in Troy. The notion of this is that it was going to bring all of the arts together and allow a platform for experimental media to influence and technology to influence performance. And the building is broken into two halves. This long rectangular box houses the artist wings here. In fact, maybe I've got this. You can see the two boxes here, the two halves. There's smaller lab spaces and artist and resident spaces here, and the large concert hall that's here. And the two halves are shown here in this section. So these are the two experimental spaces that are essentially open spaces, similar to what you might find in the REDCAT or other spaces. And this is the more traditional theater, all of which are like fully loaded. So you might say that these are the fully loaded versions of what we already know. They have a lot of technology involved in them that allow them to act as studios to transmit work to other places, and are fully wired to connect to remote sites. This is the other half of it. So this is the big concert hall with those galleries that you saw in the images. This is the entry from above that feeds into the concert hall. This is the view of that concert hall and the entry from the top side of the site. This is walking up the side of the concert hall and the inside of the concert hall. This is the theater space, again, this kind of industrial aesthetic, I guess you would call it. This is the proscenium theater space with a very steep rake on it, and this is their flexible sort of performance laboratory. And surrounding this lab these are all acoustic panels, and I'm not exactly sure how they work. I haven't visited the site yet, so. Second, and very different idea of interactive interdisciplinary arts is the Media Lab at MIT. So this is looking at the interaction of arts and technology, primarily visual arts, design technology, and engineering. This was the original media lab that was built, designed by EMPAC in the mid-'80s, and these are the interiors from that. And you can see that this kind of environment, they do have performance spaces as well as these sort of group lab spaces that are open to all sorts of different disciplines to create new proposals for involving technology and art and performance. This is an example of, in the old theater, of one of the pieces that involved performance and technology. And this is the new media lab that was designed by Maki and Associates out of Japan. So this is taking what they were already doing and sort of expanding on it. And the notion that there is a collective, I guess you would call it bullpen in some ways, where all of this activity takes place and where the kind of casual encounters can happen that would lead to new ideas in performing arts or in media. This is one of the spaces. This also just opened. So these are the kinds of things that they're doing and working with in their center. An homage to the Krannert Center and Mike. Mike and I were on faculty. I was on the faculty at Illinois, and we worked together to look at the Krannert Center, the expanded role of public spaces. So, Krannert Center are 3 theaters that are surrounded by a public plaza, and it's really a distant cousin of this theater. It was designed by the same firm. Max Abramovitz was the actual designer of this, but in plan you can see. These are the 3, actually 1, 2 theaters and the concert hall here that are surrounded by this open public space. And I think really before Mike got there, this space was ill-used, and it was conceived to be, on top of this, there are also multiple plaza levels, which were conceived to be spaces for performance or for the making of new work. And I think that Mike recognized, you can see the plazas up here, there's an outdoor amphitheater, and the idea was to make this into a social space that's available to people as well as to performance. And so he now uses this as the stage for performance, for festivals like the Wall-to-Wall Guitar Festival. This is up in the amphitheater up on the roof, so this is all outdoor performance. This is the lobby space that I was pointing to before, so there are temporary stages that happen there on a weekly basis. There's always something going on in these performances. And if you can see in the distance over here, there are now shops that are actually involved in the public area. Over here, there's a bar, so you can go there regardless of performances. You can go there. It becomes a social center for this community. And in addition, it becomes another performance venue, which is much more casual and I think brings in a different group of people than would normally come to, let's say, something in the concert hall. So these are the examples of some of the things that are going on in the public spaces there. This is a study that we did, well, that's very dark, with Mike when I was teaching the architecture school there. We looked at the notion of adding on a new facility to Krannert, what we dubbed Krannert North. And we looked at a number of scales. So this is a campus plan here, where we identified in white all of the chain of cultural facilities that wrap their way through the campus and up into what is the engineering quad at the north end of the campus, and identified this as a potential site for extending the Krannert here up into the engineering quad and forming a link between what is technology and engineering at the north side of the campus and the Krannert Center down here. And these are some of the studies that we did for that, looking at the types of spaces that weren't existing or that we might need, and then proposing some form studies that might be future-looking things for the campus to think about how to add on what would be a companion structure to the Krannert. And finally, this is looking, sort of going back to the idea that Krannert has outdoor spaces that are performative spaces, looking at the Art Center as being a performative object in and of itself, that it can either form the backdrop for art or that it can act as a stage itself. This is the Ars Electronica in Linz, Austria. It's primarily a visual art and media center, but they do performance work there as well. And this is actually, as it has been recast, this building, in 2009. This is the back side of that building. This is the original Ars Electronica building, which they moved out of in 2009. And I believe that they were there for about 10 years. And it was really dedicated toward breaking down these, again, the barriers between performance and media and experimenting with new media. So this is views of the new center from across the river. And you can see there's a highly interactive skin on this building. It's a double layer, so there is LED within the outside layer of the building that can be programmed, as you can see in this picture. This is some of this is actually visual art that's based in performative ideas that's come out of there, and these are some of the performances that have been staged there. This is the top of that building. So even the top of the building, the roof is actually itself an amphitheater. So this is where performances can take place. And this is some of the kind of work that's going on that uses the building sort of as a backdrop for performance and audience interactivity. So I'm offering these all as examples of things that you can begin to think about in trends that are happening now. And certainly not to limit your imagination, but to sort of inform you about things that I know of that are going on around. And I don't know how I'm doing on time. Yeah? I'd take any questions, or I'd love to hear comments about what you saw. Yeah?
Tom, what kind of discussion and questions do you have with your clients as you begin this kind of a process?
So what do you want to do? What's your mission? I think that's the big question. What kind of a place do you want to be, and what's the mission? Because for me, it always starts at that point. And I guess one of the questions that I was wondering about with the artists who were up on the dais before is how much does space affect the way you conceive what you do? You know, I think we all have a notion of physical space, and we're talking about the idea of the introduction of virtual space, and I think that the notions of space are changing, maybe even between our generation and the generation who's coming after us. So there's a very seamless thing, I think, on the part of the students here between being in physical space and occupying that physical space and being connected to a virtual space somewhere else, or connected virtually to a physical space somewhere else. And so for me, it's very important to know do you still respond to the physical space, and what are those physical parameters? How specific could those be to allow you to react to those spaces, physical spaces? So it's a question of specificity for me also versus generic quality, right? And I think that's one of the dialogues I'm interested in, is whether things are very specific and artists respond to those and very, push against the envelope that's created, or if they become very generic and they don't provide that kind of response on the part of the artist that you might otherwise get. But the mission is, I guess, really where you have to start.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.